Who doesn't love catching skimmers and silverfish on a feeder? I mean, what a relaxing way to fish. And what better place to do it than somewhere like Lambsdown Pool at Meadowlands. And there it is, another skimmer on a little ground bait feeder. Don't really get any simpler. Look at that one, look. Absolute beauties. So we're going to talk you through a nice little simple day's fishing, short range. Anybody can do this kind of fishing and the rewards are fantastic. So let's have a look what we're up to. So we've sat ourselves down on Lambsdown Pool here at Meadowlands Fishery, Peg 19. It's a really good area this, and we wanted to come and catch a few fish and just do a nice simple day's fishing. How I like to fish, which is actually, simple feeder fishing. We're fishing at close range, around 10 to 13 metres, like a pole line, because I know that's where they catch them. They do catch them shorter, but I just wanted to obviously have a nice comfortable day where I can just cast a nice small feeder and target the skimmers. We might catch a few bigger fish thrown in because there's a lot of fantastic carp in here, but it's still cool. It's, spring's trying to come around, but ultimately the fish are still cold, so it's a nice simple approach. And we're just going to take cage feeder, a lightish hook and hook length on a nice 10-foot rod with a bit of action to it, and feed ground bait. I've got a few maggots on my side tray, and I've got a few micro pellets because that's the sort of staple diet of the fish here. So, I have got a couple of rods set up, but, so I could chase fish and maybe have a chuck on a method later. But ultimately, an enjoyable day for me is catching skimmers, roach, and whatever else comes along at nice short range. So I'll just show you a little bit closer what I'm using as far as terminal tackle is concerned. So a simple setup, as I mentioned, 10 foot, this is the Affinium S, which is the lighter rated of our rods, with the 3/4 ounce tipping, because I'm only fishing at short distance. It's got enough power to catch big bream and carp if we hook into one, but soft enough to get nice indications and not bump fish. I've got 020 detection, which is the 5 pound, straight through down to a simple rig, which is actually a sliding ring, because it's a free running paternos that I'm using. Now you can use elasticated feeders and stuff here, but I actually like a free running feeder when I'm fishing for skimmers, because I feel that it allows the fish to pull the line through the little swivel that I've got on, and I find that you get a lot better bite when you've got a fixed rig on. Sometimes the skimmers can feel it, especially in colder weather like we've got now. They're not quite as active as they will be when it's warmer. And I think, they're feeding dead gentle, and that's how I like to set it up. I've just got a nice small cage feeder on there, look. And then I've got quite a short length on. That's around 35 centimetres or about 14 inches in old money. And I've got some more 23 exact as a link just below my stopper. And then I've got 128 exact to that, and a Guru F1 maggot 16, which I find a lovely light hook with a nice wide gate, but they're very snaggly, a word I've used in the past, which for me means that it's a nice straight point, and when the fish sort of suck that in, you find it hard to eject. And with it being light, I think they suck it in really well, but it's not as easy to go out as it is to go in, and that really works for me. So I'm going to kick the session off with a couple of feederfuls of ground bait, which I've just put a sprinkling of micros in and a odd maggot in there, because I feel like I don't need to feed lots of particles on a day like this, because ultimately the fish will come, they'll be attracted to the ground bait, which in this case is F1, Sono F1 green, a real versatile mix that catches small fish and big fish. It's slightly sweet, not too strong a fish meal, because the water is still cool. And my opinion, wrong or right, is that when you've got cool water, the fish don't want a strong fish meal. It drives them crackers. And in winter, when they're just still waking up and they're not really chewing down and they're just kind of hovering around the table of bait that you put in there, just dipping down, I want a nice simple, not a coarse mix, it's a medium to fine mix, and mag it over the top, and that should be a deadly way to catch the fish. So let's have a go and let's see if we can catch some fish. So I've simply kicked off the swim with a couple of sort of bait up style feeder, but not a big feeder. It's only 5 square. That's like a normal big cage. And I've just basically had a little plumb up before the start, and I know for a fact these are great pole pegs because there's a fair bit of depth. But of course it's still cold and the fish aren't really in the shallow water. They catch a lot of fish here short. I know that, speaking to other people, that fish matches here. And I've had a little plumb around, and around about 10 metres, which would be 10 metres from the end of my tip. So adding my rod to that, I'm thinking it's about 12.5 metres or 13 metres, which is like long pole length. I had a little plumb up there and I had a count of 3 seconds, which, depending on your opinion, for me is at least 8 foot. There or thereabouts, could be nearer 10. And but then when I went a little bit further, which were more of a comfortable cast, it dropped off to a count of 4. It's only a count of 2 if I underhand the bomb there. So I've got a gentle slope that sort of tapers away down to the full depth of this lake. And I've just decided to fish back, as I said, around that sort of 10 metres, or if you measured it from my feet to the where the feeder's landing, it's about 13. I know that they catch fish there. The depth felt about right. I mean, how do you decide what depth you want to be at? Well, I suppose that's age and experience, but I don't want to be in the shallowest water and I don't want to be in depths, because this water's trying to warm up. It's been really cold through the winter and I'm already getting liners, which is interesting. And I think the fish are trying to warm up and they're probably coming out of the deepest part of the lake as they're trying to warm up and search for slightly warmer water. But it's not summertime, we've got one straight away, look. And the fish are sort of, in my opinion, wanting to come out of the depth onto, as I said, the slightly shallower bits. And that's where I've plumped to fish. I just started off on that double maggot. And as I said, I put a few micros. What's this thing? This one seems to be pulling back a little bit. I think it's a little stocky. I mean, this is about feeder fishing, but I just can't help but say that what a great action on that rod. You know, you've obviously got a carp pulling back at you like that and just absorbed everything. But anyway, back to the fishing. Perfectly formed fish, that one is. Brand new. And quick onto the bait. And basically I'm just plopping on this sort of small 4 square cage with very little bait in my feeder, because as I said to you, I think the fish live around this particular area. You know, the fishery owner here does a great job, and there's a lot of matches and there's great information, and this is where a lot of big weights are caught, especially of skimmers. And so what I'm trying to say is that you don't need to, it's not like you're fishing a wild reservoir where the fish are swimming around in circles looking for bait in a sort of like predatory searching kind of a way. They're probably just laid here. And sometimes I think it's important to, we use a saying that's just catch them rather than try and feed them. And you don't have to fill it in when you're doing that. If you were trying to stop a shoal that's roaming around the lake, like we do, for instance, at Ferry Meadows on a natural venue where it's clear, and the fish are sort of like prospecting and looking around the lake looking for beds of bloodworm or snails or natural bait, and they happen across 2 pints of casters, a pint of pellets, some dead maggots and some chopped worms that you've filled it in at the start in traditional breaming style. The water's coloured, the fish are quite settled, you know, there is some depth, it gets fish regularly, and it means that you can just cast 2 of them. So I think it's important not to go gung-ho at the beginning and just start off steady, and we'll see how that transpires. And look at that one there. I mean, that's a cracking fish. And as I mentioned, we've not filled it in, but we're still attracting good sized fish like that, because I think they're just kind of hovering over the area. Good bream like that. Don't think you've got to fill it in, as I mentioned. Just put your bait and offer your bait over that sort of what I suppose you're really saying that your ground bait's a scent. And there is some food value in it, of course there is, but these fish are still cold. They're still coming out of winter, and they're thinking about feeding, which is why we're obviously catching them, but they're not gorging themselves. They're not quite thinking about spawning yet. It's not summer. So that's just proof that you don't have to put a pile of pudding in to catch good fish. It's amazing that when you cast a bomb in, obviously they sink very quickly, and when you put then the feeder on, it seems to take a lot longer to drop because of the surface area and how much slower a feeder falls through the water. And while I'm doing that, I just like to keep a tight line, and that's so that I can just sort of make sure that I'm fishing straight away, because when you're getting fish in a depth like this, sometimes they follow it down, and I like to just read my tip and just try and have that set as slack as I can, because it's quite deep and I'm not fishing very far, so that means I've got an angle on my line, which in my mind is putting that right in the way of fish that are moving around my swim. So I'm fishing with a 3/4 ounce tip, which is the lightest that the Affiniums come with, nice and soft, and it just allows me to read the indications, because I think when you float fishing, you're getting like little indications. You wait, and you wait for your float, and you go, that's a bite, and it's gone. And you sometimes probably count 1, 2, and then strike. Make sure it's on, and you've got to do the same with the quiver tip. I've just had a little indication there that looked like a bit of a liner, and I've had a little jag. That to me looks like a small fish, and how can you tell what fish it is? Well, just by the speed and the sort of action that you get off a bite. And that looked like a liner to me, and it's just a perfect example actually. The tip's probably moved by sort of 2 or 3 inches, and it's just done it again, because there's obviously fish in the area, and because my line's up in the air, I think I'm probably going to suffer from line bites. So it's very important to just relax, and I've got my rod in a rest, even though I'm fishing for sort of smaller fish, to stop me from striking at liners, because what you don't want to be doing is going in all the time, emptying a feeder full of ground bait and driving everything crackers. And just by allowing that soft tip and just keeping your eye on it, and you can read your swim, and you'll know what's a bite. And all right, sometimes they'll just pull your rod in, but sometimes you'll see it and it's got it, and it'll just hold and then jag again, and you know that's a bite. Whereas that last one, you'd have been inclined to strike at it because it pulled it right round, but then it would really slow, and they're line bites. Now, most experienced anglers know what a line bite is and what's not, but for the people that have not done lots of this type of fishing, deciphering between bites and liners is massively important because of what I've just said. You don't want to keep chucking a feeder in, ploughing more and more bait in when they're not particularly feeding that well. So important to try and control it, and by doing that I mean not striking at every single indication. And we'll just wait for that to go around, and it will. And that were a different indication altogether. We pick up and that's on. Only a small skimmer, but they're all welcome nonetheless. And you could see the difference in the bite. Completely different bite to when we had those liners, because down it goes, back and comes again. The fish is hooked, and you can see you've got a bite. And that is a little stocky, which is probably why we had line bites, because they're notorious for aggressively feeding. And that little thing of beauty, perfectly formed, just like me. And that's the interesting thing about reading your tip, because now that I know what we've just caught, that tells me that when I'm getting that indication, they're round my feeder. And of course, I've got quite a short hook length on here really for skimmers, but it's coloured. We put an odd pellet in. The fish are going to come very close to us. They're going to come close to the feeder, and to make sure that we convert indications into fish, I've just made sure that I fish a nice short hook length, which will improve his catch rate. So you'll see, if you look out into the lake, how flat it's become. The wind's dropped, and it's all of a sudden got warmer, the sun's started to come out, it's a bit brighter, and the fishing's gone a little bit harder. Now, I don't know if you noticed that, but I've actually not filled my feeder, because the fish are still there, but they're a little bit more tentative, and I'm getting an odd indication. Now, we've had some stocky carp move into the swim, which obviously are fairly new fish, and they're a little bit aggressive really, those fish, and sort of they're attacking the feeder, and I just felt that there were too much bait there and they couldn't see the wood for the trees. I also foul hooked a couple of skimmers, and I think that's because when the wind drops like this, you get a slight movement in the water, and it just makes the fish a little bit more sort of active. And when it stops and everything sort of goes a bit flat, the fish become a little bit more faffy and floaty and waffy around, and they kind of pecking and nibbling at the bait rather than sort of feeding heavy, and you get odd indications. And so I've just actually had my last two fish, one with a skimmer and one with a stocky carp, on an empty feeder. Now, this is my third cast on that. It's a cracking trick. If you're getting indications not catching fish, just to be able to put a few fish in the net. But the trick with it is to knowing when to put more feed in again, because you can't just keep throwing an empty feeder, of course. But when you've been catching fish, and you know, I mentioned earlier about reading your tip and not putting too much bait in, because you just keep emptying your feeder and emptying your feeder, and it makes it worse. It's like compounding. Well, by then casting an empty feeder, you're then just going to pick off fish from the sort of feed zone. But then, of course, you're spooking them, and there's no feed to attract them back. So this might be one cast too many, but it's a cracking trick. There's another way to do it as well, which is by nipping up your feeder. And what I mean by that is if you can get your ground bait to the right consistency, which sometimes means you've just got to splash a bit of water on it to dampen it, make it a little bit more sticky, you can squeeze the feed and nip it up real hard, and that doesn't release the bait as quick, and the fish predominantly, you know, sort of attacking your feed, especially when you've got colour, and it means that they're not picking up your hook bait. It has crossed my mind that a little method feeder might be amazing on a day like today, where you get this little change in conditions and the fish have been a little bit more picky, and basically what you're doing with that is narrowing down the window that they've got to, the opportunity that they've got to pick up your bait, because you're focusing the hook and the hook bait in a little pile around a method. So sometimes that might be a way to do it, but we've just had two quick fish off the back of that, and I've had a couple of indications on this cast, but as I said, this might be one cast too many. Sometimes you can be a little bit greedy, so towing eeling, as they say, you know, little bit of bait, then pull back, little bit of bait, pull back. And if you were pole fishing, would you actually be throwing a small ball of ground bait in? Because, you know, a feeder full of ground bait is sort of that sort of amount. Once you've squeezed that up and nipped it into a feeder, you wouldn't throw that in every single cast if you were float fishing or pole fishing. So why would you do it on a feeder? Cracking little tip for maximising bites when fish are just being a little bit picky. The session is becoming a little bit challenging, but this is what we love about fishing, the fact that, you know, we had some of them big skimmers, bream, and we had probably 4 or 5 stockies, roach or perch, and then it's gone a bit. Now what's really interesting is when you're having a pleasure session, which is a bit like what we're doing here, and I try not to attack it in a match style because this is a sort of video to talk about how things go, and I think sometimes by not immediately changing and seeing it through, it allows us to work through the problems that we face as anglers in a peg. And I've just been looking at this, you know, and I know there's an odd fish there because I'm getting odd indications, and I'm convinced that this flat, I mean, I can see carp cruising, a lot of fish moving on surface, and I think what happens is when it goes still, the fish come up, and if I were in a match, I'd probably have other lines set up. I'd probably have a long line where I'd be trying to catch a carp or some bream on some micro pellets, and I'd also be thinking that sort of over halfway in the session, I'd probably start feeding a short line where I'd be putting in lots of corn and micros and things like that. But ultimately, I've got fish in my swim, and we've only got that one swim because we tried to have a simple day's fishing. I don't know if that were a liner. I think some of these are stocky carp, and they can be real tricky. And what I was getting around to saying was that I think if I were trying to fish a match now and get the most out of my peg, I'd probably pick me other 10-foot rod up, the more powerful one, and put a little method on it with probably a small micro bandem, sort of like the 4mm, 3mm bandem with a 16 on and a method, and just drop it over the top of that area that I've been feeding, because I think the stocky carp there, and I think even the skimmers are a little bit more tentative, and they're just pecking at the bait, and I can tell that by these indications that I'm getting. They're not, you know, leaning on the line because they're feeding, they're just snatching at it and flicking through the peg, and that makes fishing interesting because it's probably time to make a change if that's what we're trying to do. But of course, I wanted to say, here's a fishing rod, one rod, 10-footer, small feeder, we catch this, and I'm very happy with what we've caught. But the matchman in me and the competitive person in me is like, it's not enough, and it's not good enough. But if I'm just relaxing and enjoying my day, then ultimately you're quite happy to sit here and wait for it to tow around, which it will do. I had a few fish on the empty feeder. I've started feeding again to try and draw some fish in, and I'm getting an odd indication, and maybe it's time to drop the open ender over it. But what an interesting session it is, and it's, for me, it's purely about the conditions and the change of the conditions, but it's probably time to make a change and see if we can't make something happen. So immediately after just picking up that other rod with a method feeder on, first chuck, skimmer around a pound, then immediately a stocky, and they are the fish that are really focusing in on that bait. And of course, when you're fishing a feeder with a tail on, then you're gonna get fish stabbing at your feeder but not actually picking up the hook bait. And a method feeder is really a focus of that. Now you could probably do, you know, if you didn't want to pick up another rod, you could probably just pick up, shorten your hook length, right down to probably 6 inches or so. But I was just intrigued to know if the fish were there and if they'd respond to what is a great killer method, which is a method feeder. Just dropped over the top. Just got this other rod here. This is the Affinium 12 model, the new range from us. This is the slightly more powerful rod, which is perfect for small up to large carp. Perfect for the method feeder. It's a 1 ounce tip, and that just, you know, almost pulled the rod in. You can see the fish. I've just had a little indication straight away. They're coming straight to that feeder, and clearly the fish are feeding, but it's how they're feeding that's changed. Where we had quite a few fish grazing, and there was probably that sort of they felt the confidence of having the ripple on top of them, even though it's, like I said, 8-10 foot deep. I just think they can sort of feel a bit more spooked, and they're probably heading to the bottom. They're probably living 3 foot off the deck, going down, grabbing a bit of bait, taking a mouthful and coming up. And by focusing your bait in a pile, rather than when you're open-ended feeder fishing, it's probably more spread, and your hook length is clearly further away, then the fish probably coming down, hitting your feeder, giving you a little line bite, and back up, and you've not converted an indication into a fish. Whereas with a method, you know, the theory is that your hook bait is now sat on the top of a little pile of bait, like a little mouse trap. Fish dive down, grab it, and they can't help but be hooked. That one's like it just shoved the feeder. Is that on? That looks like it's on. Yeah. And that actually feels like a bream. Or at least a big skimmer. You'll notice obviously slightly different action in this rod, designed for better fish, catching probably quicker, slightly bigger hooks, but equally soft enough to play skimmers, and that's a nice fish. And that just should prove that when you're fishing, sometimes you've really got to think about what's happening. That one's unhooked itself in the net. Real nice fish like that. And just by reading your tip, which has told me there's fish in the swim, but there were quick plucks, the fish are coming down, attacking the bait, and then probably doing this and back up again. And you've not got them in your hook area for long enough. Whereas with the method, they've got to come towards your hook, because your hook is on the top of your feeder, and ultimately that means resulting in more conversions from indications into fish. Very important tip, and you know, it's dead interesting. But that's fishing. So I'll think about what we've talked about today, which is that we've started off, the conditions have changed, and we've had to change with it. So I'm going to probably have a little chuck, probably short milk length down on my open-ended feeder, and get a feel for that, because I'm constantly learning and understanding it. But so effective. Little B911 16 small bandem to a little banjo style feeder, and it's so effective. So obviously we've had a cracking little session. We've caught loads of fish, skimmers, stockies, few roach, few perch, and really enjoyed it. We've obviously shown you the new rods. It's probably the first time on one of these YouTube videos, and hopefully you'll have seen them out in the shops by now. But if you like this video, then we've got lots more, so don't forget to subscribe and tune into some of our great videos, and thanks for watching this time.